Many people don't struggle because they lack intuition. They struggle because they've spent so long living in pressure that they no longer know what intuition feels like. You can feel the difference. One voice in you pushes, another simply knows in quiet. But when the nervous system has been organized around urgency for long enough, those signals begin to blur together. Overthinking starts to feel like responsibility. Anxiety starts to feel like preparation. Mental pressure starts to masquerade as clarity. And so people spend years trying to think their way into certainty, not realizing that the harder they push internally, the more difficult it becomes to hear anything subtle underneath the noise. What makes this especially confusing is that urgency can feel convincing. Fear can feel intelligent, almost wise. Mental intensity can feel important and vital. But intuition rarely arrives with that kind of force. It usually appears much more quietly than people expect. A subtle hesitation, a pause, a sense that something is slightly off somewhere. A feeling of openness toward one direction and contraction toward another before the mind has assembled an explanation. And because those signals are quieter than fear, quieter than pressure, quieter than the mind's need to resolve uncertainty, many people learn to override them long before they learn to trust them. Not because something is wrong with them, ever, but because they've been taught that clarity should feel forceful. Intuition is often treated as something mystical or magical, but most of the time it's much simpler and much quieter than people expect. Intuition is often misunderstood because people are usually looking for something dramatic. A powerful feeling, one that's quite strong, a crystal clear certainty, a sudden powerful emotional conviction. But most of the time those experiences are not intuition at all. In reality, they are activation, and activation can feel incredibly persuasive. The nervous system does not only produce calm signals, it also produces urgency, fixation, emotional intensity, racing thoughts, and the overwhelming need to resolve uncertainty. When those states arise strongly enough, people often assume they must mean something important. But intensity is not the same thing as accuracy. In fact, the louder a signal feels internally, the more likely it is being amplified by fear, identity, emotional pressure, or unresolved survival patterns trying to regain stability. True intuition usually feels very different. It feels quieter, cleaner, less dramatic, less forceful. It does not tighten the body. It does not demand immediate action. It does not become more aggressive when questioned. It simply remains available always. This is important because many people have learned to trust the signals that create the most activation inside them. The problem is that activation narrows perception. It compresses time. It creates the feeling that something must be decided immediately. And once urgency enters, listening becomes difficult. You can feel this in ordinary moments of life. Sometimes you enter a conversation and immediately sense something is off, even before anything obvious happens. The body registers misalignment before the mind has evidence. Sometimes you feel pressure to say yes to an opportunity, while another part of you quietly contracts underneath the excitement. Sometimes something feels deeply correct before you can explain why. And other times anxiety becomes so intense that it gets mistaken for intuition simply because the signal feels strong. This is why people often remain in relationships, careers, or identities long after contact has faded. Not because they cannot feel the truth, but because urgency overrides it. The mind demands certainty while the body quietly continues signaling something else. The nervous system often recognizes truth before the mind organizes language around it. And this recognition is usually subtle. Not a command, not a performance, not an emotional explosion, more like a quiet relational intelligence. The body sensing coherence before thought has fully formed around it. This is why intuition cannot be reduced to positive thinking, manifestation techniques, or spiritual certainty. Intuition is not fantasy, it is not compulsion. It is not the inflation of identity disguised as knowing. It is a form of contact, a responsiveness that emerges before conceptualization. And the clearer the nervous system becomes, the easier it is to distinguish that contact from the noise created by fear and self-protection. But intuition is not meant to become another authority you obey. It's meant to restore dialogue with reality. When people lose contact with intuition, they usually do not become less intelligent. They become more forceful and less intuitive. The mind starts compensating for the loss of contact by increasing control. More planning, more analysis, more pressure, more attempts to force certainty before reality has had time to respond. And because this is often rewarded externally, it can take years to recognize what is happening. A person can become highly functional while remaining deeply disconnected from themselves. This is where intuition and aligned achievement become inseparable. Many people succeed while abandoning the very signals that would have kept the success livable. They push through exhaustion because the goal feels important. They ignore subtle contraction because momentum has already been built. And eventually, success arrives, carrying nervous system collapse underneath it. From the outside, life appears successful. But internally, there is fatigue, pressure, emotional narrowing. The quiet sense that something essential was left behind in order to maintain movement. This happens because when intuition is overridden repeatedly, force takes its place. And force can produce outcomes for a while. It can build careers, scale businesses, maintain identities, and create momentum. But force cannot create coherence ever. Eventually, the nervous system begins to pay for what achievement has been costing. Overthinking increases, rest becomes difficult, simple decisions feel heavy, the body remains activated even after goals are achieved. Not because the person is weak, but because the system no longer trusts the pace or direction it is being pushed through. The same pattern appears in relationships. Often people know something is wrong long before they admit it to themselves. The body senses disconnection early. Conversation feels subtly strained. Presence begins to thin, something no longer feels alive. But instead of staying in contact with those signals, the mind starts negotiating against them. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I just need to try harder. Maybe things will improve once this changes. Why? Because intuition rarely arrives with absolute certainty. And many people have learned that they are not allowed to move until certainty exists. So they remain, not because contact is absent, but because uncertainty feels unsafe. And the longer intuition is overridden, the more difficult it becomes to distinguish genuine knowing from fear, attachment, or habit. The same thing happens with money and work. People accept opportunities from urgency rather than coherence. They scale faster than their nervous system can safely hold. They force direction because not knowing feels intolerable. And externally, this can even look successful, but internally, the body keeps signaling strain. Pressure replaces responsiveness. Identity becomes fused with performance. Life begins to feel managed instead of lived. This is why misunderstanding intuition eventually affects every area of reality. Because intuition is not simply about making good decisions. It is about remaining in relationship with what is actually happening instead of overriding it for the sake of certainty, identity, or control. And this leads to a critical distinction. Intuition does not eliminate uncertainty. It helps you remain in contact while uncertainty exists. Most people use thinking to escape uncertainty. They want conclusions that remove discomfort. They want guarantees before movement. They want clarity before participation. But intuition functions differently. It allows responsiveness before certainty. It keeps the dialogue with reality open long enough for accuracy to emerge naturally. Intuition does not force clarity in advance. It keeps you responsive while reality unfolds. And when this begins to become visible, the entire question changes. The question is no longer, how do I become more intuitive? The deeper question becomes, what in me keeps overriding contact? The deeper shift here is not learning how to force intuition to become louder. It is learning how to stop creating so much internal pressure that subtle intelligence becomes impossible to hear. Because clarity is not something the mind manufactures through effort. Clarity emerges naturally when the system no longer requires certainty in order to feel safe. This changes the entire orientation of growth. The movement is no longer force harder, analyze more, secure the outcome, control the future. The movement becomes listen more carefully, remain in contact longer, allow reality to respond before concluding what something means. This is why aligned movement is less about domination and more about responsiveness, not passivity, not withdrawal, not going with the flow as avoidance. Responsiveness, the capacity to remain present enough with reality that intelligence wider than mental control becomes available again. And this is important because many people misunderstand what this work is pointing toward. You are not trying to follow intuition perfectly. You are not trying to eliminate thought. You are not trying to become passive. You are not abandoning structure, planning, or action. The mind still matters. Thinking still matters. Structure still matters. But they stop functioning as absolute authority. Instead, they become part of a larger relational process, a process where the body, reality, timing, feedback, emotion, sensation, and contact are all allowed to participate in intelligence. This is the real shift from force to coherence. Force tries to decide reality in advance. Coherence remains responsive enough for reality to reveal itself. And the nervous system plays a central role in this, because the more activated the system becomes, the narrower perception gets. Urgency compresses awareness. Fear speeds interpretation. Pressure demands immediate conclusions. But the quieter the nervous system becomes, the easier it is to recognize signals that were always there. Not because intuition suddenly appears, but because internal noise stops drowning it out. And this is why intuition often feels surprisingly ordinary once people reconnect with it. Not dramatic, not mystical, not emotionally explosive. More often, intuition feels like the absence of internal conflict. A simple sense of openness, a lack of strain, a direction that does not require self-coercion to sustain. And this changes the way life itself is experienced, because much of human exhaustion does not come from action alone. It comes from the constant attempt to force certainty before relationship has had time to unfold. The mind wants guarantees before participation. It wants clarity before movement. It wants resolution before contact. But reality rarely works that way. Life reveals itself relationally. One step changes the next step. Contact reshapes perception. Feedback reorganizes understanding. And intuition allows participation in that unfolding without collapsing into control. Life becomes less exhausting when you stop trying to force certainty before relationship has had time to unfold. And perhaps this is where the real shift begins. Not in trying harder to become intuitive, not in searching for special abilities, not in forcing yourself to always know, but in becoming quiet enough to notice what has been there underneath the pressure the entire time. Notice how often pressure has been mistaken for guidance. How many decisions felt urgent simply because uncertainty felt intolerable. How often the mind rushed to conclusions, not because clarity had arrived, but because the nervous system wanted relief. And notice how exhausting that becomes. The constant need to know, to decide, to secure, to resolve. Not because life itself is demanding it, but because the body has learned to equate uncertainty with danger. Now notice something else. Notice whether there is a quieter intelligence underneath all of that. One that never needed to push. One that does not tighten when questioned. One that does not disappear when certainty is unavailable. One that remains present without demanding immediate resolution. Maybe intuition has never been absent. Maybe it has simply been buried underneath urgency, self-protection, and the pressure to force clarity before relationship has had time to unfold. And if that's true, then the movement forward may be gentler than you imagined. Not another strategy, not more control, not stronger effort, just less overriding, less forcing, less premature certainty, less internal domination, and more contact, more listening. More space, more willingness to remain present long enough for reality to reveal itself gradually instead of demanding that it explain itself immediately. Intuition may not be something you need to find. It may be something that becomes visible when force relaxes enough for contact to return. The body often knows long before the mind agrees. Clarity rarely arrives through pressure. What is truly aligned usually does not need to shout. And when force softens, intelligence becomes easier to hear.